Welcome everyone to the third panel discussion about the future of education and skills in Asia, challenge and opportunities. I'm Ravindra, the founder and CEO of the Asia Network, and I will be moderating the session today. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session, so please feel free to ask your question in the chat box. I would like to thank our panelists and participants for making the time today. Before diving into our session, let me introduce you to Mrs Yuri Obara Belfali for the opening remarks. Yuri spent the last 25 years in France, US, and in several countries of Southeast Asia, Africa, and Middle East and North Africa region. Before joining the OECD, she worked for UNICEF and the World Bank in the field of human development and had a leadership role in advising governments for education reforms and gender mainstreaming. Welcome, Yuri.
Thank you, Ravindra, and hello, everybody, participants. Greetings from Paris. So let me start by giving some ideas on the future of education and thinking about the new norms or the new context of education and skills development. When we talk about the future of learning, skills development, of course, we have to be aware of the ever-changing context of the society and economies. And of course, we have many issues to consider, such as advancing climate change and its implication on the society, digital technologies, of course, but also more and more connected people, global supply chain, connectedness in terms of one issue to the others. Also, we are currently thinking about the violence and aggressions still happening in 21st century. Nobody probably thought that it would continue in this way at this time. So what's the implication of all these on the learning and skills of young people? OECD has been asking these questions with many countries around the world, and also involving policymakers, teachers, students, and business people to think about what kind of competencies we should expect young people to develop, or we should help young people to develop, to help them prepare for the future. And in addition to the conventional and traditional areas of learning, such as developing knowledge and skills, more and more people highlight the importance of attitudes of students or value drives to use what they have learned in schools in a real life. For example, we have identified 3 areas of competencies which are important for the transformation of the future. One is creating new values, capacity of young people, not just to learn what is available, but create new values. Second is taking responsibilities and use what they know in a responsible manner and ethical manner. And the third is to reconcile tensions and dilemmas, not only seeking for one unique right answers, but handle the dilemmas, different perspectives to address issues from different point of views and using different solution channels. However, we still have a big challenge. For example, through the PISA test that you might have already heard of, in addition to the math and science skills, we ask questions students about their global competence. To what extent they have been developing the skills, knowledge, and competencies to thrive in the globally connected world. And good news is that around 80% of students on average in that study say that they have chance to learn about global issues in schools, such as poverty or migration, climate change. However, only around 60% of students say that they feel capable of understanding and analyze the implication of these issues, or around 60 or even less students say that they feel they are capable of doing something. So the important issue is how they can bridge what they know and what they are able to do with the reality, solutions, taking the responsibility to be part of the change. In Asia, it is promising in a way that many countries all value dimensions explicitly in the education strategy and curriculum. For example, in Singapore and Korea, their education visions clearly highlights the importance of values such as resilience, responsibility, or harmony. However, we see also through our analysis many challenges. In many of the Asian countries, some of the social emotional skills are not necessarily as high as other OECD countries. For example, growth mindset of young people to believe that they can make efforts and they can be better, they can do better and grow. In these areas, despite high academic performance, some countries like Hong Kong or Singapore are not necessarily doing well, or adaptability or cognitive resilience, which means that in a changing context, people and students believe that they can adjust their behavior and thinking in a new situation. In this area, for example, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, they are not as good as their academic performance. So these are the challenges that we need to think about. And this could be also very particularly important in the context of the learning in the digital world, where students have to also design their own learning, navigate the digital space and real space, and construct their reality, combining all the opportunities that they have. Thank you.
Thanks, Yuri, for your opening remarks. So now for our panel discussions today, we have Mrs. Cheong from Singapore, founder of PreSchool Market, a social enterprise focusing on consultancy work and social impact work in the preschool industry. Then we have Cheryl and Fernando from Malaysia, CEO of Pemimpin, an organization focused on improving school leadership. Lastly, we welcome Neelesh Bhatia from Singapore, co-founder and CEO of Akadasia, a group of highly experienced educators, entrepreneurs, creative thinkers, and technology professionals who are on a mission to provide free access to a good quality education to all in Asia. Welcome to everyone. So let's start now with my first question. The new normal brings its own challenges and may accentuate existing inequalities in the education sector. How are you experiencing it in your respective business and country? Let's start with Sufan first.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Very well.
Yeah. So hi everyone, Sufan from Singapore here. Nice to meet everyone here. So yes, this new normal has actually, almost drive every parent crazy here in Singapore in the early days of the pandemic. Yeah, so as we manage HBL, which we call home-based learning, and work from home was actually seriously not easy for our parents here. So over here, children from the well-to-do families, they definitely have the necessary IT facilities and equipment to actually access learning from home. However, children from the less well-to-do, they struggle and they actually require support from the community. So we do see some of the ground-up community groups, they actually step up to get donated laptops, or even they arrange learning for children at a specific location so that these children are not being left out. And based on our experience on working in the preschool industry, we do see the preschool educators, they step up to prepare materials, prepare online learning to support these families and to ensure that our children get to learn as well. So the mandate is, for us is no child is being left behind. So this is the first thing we observe as we go around in this preschool industry. And the second thing we do observe is that in this pandemic, for many of our preschool educators, when their own children has to stay at home due to school closures, these moms are actually unable to turn up for work. So as they do not have the support network. So we do see that many of our preschools, they actually have some manpower crunch. Yeah, that's.
Thank you, Sufan. Neelesh, perhaps you want to go?
Yeah, hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me here today. I'm very, very happy to join all of you here to share my insights. With Acad Asia, we primarily support teachers all around Asia. Singapore is actually not, although we are headquartered in Singapore, Singapore is not our main market. Our main market is primarily focused towards Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, India. So those are some of the markets that we work in. The challenges that we are seeing, I mean, I think most emerging markets have similar challenges, at least in Southeast Asia, which is access to internet, or rather the lack of access to internet, the lack of access to devices, so on and so forth. That is all very common. But one thing that really stands out to us is the quality of instruction, especially when it comes to blended, online, offline, hybrid models, or even blended models. The quality of instruction is now, it's quite transparent to see that our teachers really, really need to be upskilled at a war footing, literally at a war footing, because unfortunately for the teachers, the younger generation are far more adept at using technology than our dear teachers. And it's not just the use of technology, but it's also how do you actually deliver a lesson online on a platform like this. For example, if you're running a lesson on Zoom, and if you're expecting to run a class back to back, 30 every hour for the entire day, there is a lot of fatigue, and no wonder you find teachers, parents, students, everybody basically having major well-being issues. Everybody's stressed out. So I think whilst there are challenges, infrastructure challenges, the key thing in this entire issue to me is still rests with the teachers. Because if the teachers are not trained to deliver fun and engaging lessons using technology on any platform, it doesn't matter where they are teaching, whether they're in online, offline, hybrid, it doesn't matter. The lesson's not going to meet its objective. There is not going to be any engagement, and the students are basically just going to be, switching off their cameras, and that's it. And you don't even know whether they're there or not. So that's the big challenge that we find in the markets that we're in. I mean, apart from the infrastructure issues, which I think, is very common, except for in Singapore. Yeah.
Thanks, Neelesh. I do agree with you with the first. I think the digital infrastructures are some key limitation, especially in the developing countries.
Yep.
But you're right. Teachers are the backbone of education. So quality of teaching is a very important one. Thanks,
Right.
Neelesh. Over to you, Cheryl. We cannot hear you, Cheryl. Yeah, it's better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. So I think for us here in Malaysia, the first issue is, of course, access to data and devices. And I think when the pandemic first started, we realized that, I think the data was at like 1.8 million of our students did not have access to proper data and devices. And even if they did, a lot of them were sharing it with their siblings and their parents, and they really struggled to get access to any sort of learning. So for us, as we are training teachers and we were working with school leaders, one of the first things that we got them to do was really a needs analysis to see where were the students in terms of technology. Is it no tech at all? Is it low tech, or is it high tech? And once the schools and once the teachers understood where their students are, then they could design interventions or they could design lessons that were appropriate for them. So for example, in some of our schools, the students had no access at all. So it didn't make sense to do any lessons online. So what the teachers did was they prepared modules for them that they would leave in school, that parents would come and pick up and, help them to do at home. And for the schools that had low tech, a lot of them conducted lessons on WhatsApp, on Telegram, things that didn't require very high bandwidth of internet, and students were still learning. At least there was some learning going on every day. I think the last thing we want is for learning to be completely disrupted and students not getting anything. And finally, if there was high-tech solutions, then they could conduct their lessons on Google Meet and so on. I agree with Neelesh. I think for us also the key issue was the training of teachers. When the pandemic first started, the teachers were, although there was so much talk before this on, digital learning and how do we, make this more advanced, but they had no proper training on how to adapt and what to do. How do I do a low-tech solution? How do I do a high-tech solution? How do I even carry out a needs analysis? And that was very worrying. But I think in our organization, we tried to provide that training for them, that support for them. How do you use different tech tools? How do you not be overwhelmed with the many tech tools that are there, but you pick the ones that are most appropriate for your lesson, for your classroom? I think that was very important in trying to bridge the gap that's there.
Thanks, Cheryl. And I think it's a perfect transition to my second question, because you mentioned data. And my second question will be on there is one limitation of EdTech, and a big one, it could be on the ethical issue with education. We've seen a lot recently, cyberbullying, safe sites, for learning and research, but also technological equipment, data privacy, as you mentioned, and so on. So how can we prevent those? Perhaps I will start with Cheryl for this question.
Yeah, I think again, it comes down to training, right? When
Yes.
the teachers are not equipped with the skills to do this, everything is new, everything is very difficult for them. And I think these are some of the things that they don't consider when they're doing online lessons, or, because you are, of course, so focused on delivering your lessons, and there's already that so much of learning curve that you have to take to learn, how to use the different technology. What more to think about issues such as safety, child protection, and things like that. And I think, even pre-pandemic, these issues were prevalent, but not talked about or not given the adequate training and support. But again, I think what we try to do in Malaysia, and at least what we try to do in our organization, is to provide them that space for knowledge sharing, where they can share best practices, they can see what other schools are doing in terms of child safety and protection, and how they can then share this knowledge with their students.
Thanks, Cheryl. Neelesh, your thought on that?
I actually completely agree with Cheryl on that. It all starts with training. So in fact, on our platform, what we strive for is scalability, first of all. Because when you start looking at teacher training, I mean, most of the current methods of teacher training, are still being done on Zoom, or half face to face and half online and things like that. So the problem there is, how much can you scale at the end of the day? So our big issue with that we're basically solving is that scalability. So within like 5 minutes, we can onboard like about 50,000 teachers, no problem. And then give them access to cyber safety courses. That is so important, because so the way, I mean, if I could give you an analogy, think of it this way. If you have, I'm sure all of you have heard of Grab. I'm not sure whether you have Grab in France, but
we don't have yet, but we heard about that. Yeah, the transportation.
So, transportation, right? So
exactly.
let me just kind of give you an analogy. Imagine if you tell a Grab driver or an Uber driver to stop driving his car, and then just jump to flying a Boeing 747 within 48 hours. What's going to happen? The plane's going to crash and everybody's dead. So it is the same thing that has happened with this transition, where when the lockdowns happened, teachers were suddenly given 48 hours pretty much to transition, without giving them any resources, without giving them any training. And of course, initially you could find a lot of reports in the press about cyberbullying and all kinds of stuff happening, right? Of course, that has now gone down a bit because teachers have been trained to a certain extent, but it is still a big issue, because when you start looking at cyber safety, there are so many other things involved. There's data privacy. Are the platforms that people are using out there, Are they GDPR compliant? Are they in Singapore? Are they IM8 compliant? Do they follow the right PDPA guidelines? All of these things matter. And unfortunately, a lot of teachers, a lot of schools do not know that you need to check all these things rather than just go and, use some kind of a platform. Because, and also the other issue is, it is important for teachers, number one, to know how to protect themselves first. Second, how do they protect their children in the classroom? It's a two-step process. And in some countries like the Philippines, you might even want the parents to get involved, and maybe the teacher needs to even train the parents as to what to do and what not to do, because a lot of these parents are absolutely clueless. They've never done this before. I mean, so it is not just, about the child, but it starts with the teacher. Teacher understands it on how I protect myself. Then I cascade that down to how I protect my student. And then hopefully, if the parent is interested, maybe even, especially nowadays when parents mostly are sitting in on online classes, maybe they can even pick up a few things here and there. But I think it's a collective effort. It's not just one thing altogether, but it's very important.
Yeah, agree with you. Thanks, Neelesh. I think Sufan will be very happy to answer to these questions because you have yourself some kids and your industry is early age education. So
Yeah, so yes, I have two young kids. Yeah, so in my opinion, I really felt that the two key partners for every child is actually to tackle such ethical issues as firstly the school as a whole, which is an important partner of the child, because I think we will need to actually have a whole school approach, from everyone, including the teachers, to educate the children about cyberbullying. And this school, we also need to create a safe space for the children to, for them to actually confide about their situation or encounters, with these trained teachers and trained counselors on the things that they actually they encounter on the internet, or the things that they met on their their messaging app, etc. And yes, as the two panelists have shared earlier, teacher training is very important, especially with the use of tech tools and how to use the technology correctly. And secondly is the family support. Yeah, I think there's a strong need for parents to also be involved too, and to be trained to monitor for signs of distress. And at home, us as parents, we should also monitor the use of the internet at home, the use of mobile devices at home. And I think last but not least, I felt communication with the children is very important as well. We should always, speak heart to heart with them to really find out what are they going through, and what are the things that they actually meet, the people that they meet online.
thanks, Sufan. Yeah, I think that education, training, and having also a healthy environment, and especially coming from the parents, is very important to deal with that issue. So now we will go directly to our last and final questions for this panel discussions, which will be more about educational technology has become increasingly important, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen a lot of AR, VR, and AI technology. So what are your thoughts for the future of education in a specific timeline in 2030? If you can give us some trends and opportunities, please. Perhaps we can start with Neelesh this time.
Yeah, thanks. I think the opportunities are immense. I mean, AI, AR, VR, blockchain, all of that, tokenization, gamification. There are many things which are possible. But I think the key issue, which a lot of us seem to miss out in all this hype, is how many people actually will, realistically speaking, have access to this. Because right now, the way I look at it, the way the technology companies are, building products and, looking at the pricing models and, business models and stuff, it seems to me that majority of the products are particularly designed for international school students and private schools, not for the public schools. public schools miss out on a lot of this stuff. So unless and until the cost of all this technology drops, I don't see a big change happening, because, I mean, forget about AR, VR. I mean, we don't even have, I mean, in Philippines, for example, students don't even have a handphone. Let's start with a handphone or a tablet first, right? So, I mean, all these other technologies are great. They're fantastic. We can do many, many things with it. But let's start with the basics. And what I see is, like I mentioned, there's a lot of hype around all these technologies. But are they really the way to go? Maybe, I don't know. But by 2030, will all students all around the world be able to access those technologies? I don't think so. I think it will still be the same. And I'm sorry to be negative here, but I think I'm just being realistic. Looking at the way things are going, I don't think there's going to be a major change with public schools unless edtech companies really take a stand and figure out a business model which is volume-based rather than profit-based. So that's my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Neelesh. I think, digital gap, you're right that the equitable access and also how we use those technology for good, I think it's very important. And, it's not, sadly, it's not only reaching educational sectors, but, in the military sectors. I've just seen recently with the drones, with the Ukraine crisis, that's another debate. But I think really it's important to have, answering the question too, to have an ethic behind that. So perhaps, Sufen, you want to add something on that?
So the this COVID-19 pandemic has indeed changed the world. I think through retail versus e-commerce and even the education field. So we have seen many changes, and I think one common trend we see is how this world has been connected, can be connected through this technology. So I think many of us, the common word we hear now is, let's Zoom, let's meet on Teams, or even, I have WhatsApp you. Yeah, so these are all the platforms that I think has changed our lives. And there's good, both good and bad that come out of such platforms. I guess we all know now, online meetings and instant messaging have become a regular part of everyone's life, including the young and the old, and is most likely to stay. Yeah, so on one hand, too much of this can actually contribute to, mental fatigue and stress. But on the other hand, I think it has also enabled us, across borders to collaborate on a greater scale, cross-border collaboration, engagement, and even, faster communication. Yeah, so I guess this is only what some would say, our entrance into the metaverse on a global scale.
Yes, thanks, Sufen. I think you mentioned also a very important point, what we call digital dementia. I think that you're right that people are oversaturated with all the new technologies, since very early age, and also with now another issue, which is fake informations. So that's also very important to highlight. And perhaps Cheryl, you want to add something to that final question?
Yeah, I think like in Malaysia, we saw, it took a pandemic to really get our teachers and our students up to speed with whatever we were planning before this in terms of, digital solutions in education and all of that. It really increased during the pandemic. But I think at the same time, the gap still exists. And if anything, it's gotten larger. The pandemic just showed us how much of inequity exists in our education system, especially in Malaysia, and how, any edtech solution coming in to say that they want to bridge this gap, they have to really understand what they're doing. And I think I read somewhere that, especially because of the pandemic, edtech solutions are mushrooming as fast as, during the .com era and things like that. And will it cause like a boom of, all these edtech solutions? And as they're thinking about solutions, I think sometimes we forget that the need, what is the real need of the students? And you can create a solution and you can create something that you think will change education. But I think until and unless we really understand the gaps, we really understand what the students need, what the teachers need, it will just be a solution that's there. So for me, I think I'm very cautious about, how we are balancing this whole thing between very excited, yes, lots of advancement and all that, but at the same time coming back to the core of it, which is the students who are continuously marginalized will continue to be marginalized regardless of all of this, right? So how are we trying to bridge this gap? I think for me that's always the key issue.
Thanks, Cheryl. So now we will go directly to the Q&A session, and I've seen some questions from the participants. I will take one from Lina, which is working at area. She said, private school usually is equipped with more advanced tech. How to narrow the quality gap between public, private school, and perhaps what kind of policy intervention? Who want to answer to this question? Okay, Neelesh.
Yeah,
Please.
I think that's a very important question. What can be done to reduce or narrow the quality gap? I think it all starts with the companies that are developing solutions, first and foremost. So if you look at most edtech platforms these days, I think it's become, unfortunately, education technology has become a rat race for profitability. Basically, everybody's trying to chase profits, bring in students, and just make the money. And then, like Cheryl mentioned, like the .com boom, there could be a .com bust too, right? Because there are so many companies coming out, and everybody's basically chasing the same apple, which is international schools and private schools. For us at Acadasia, this is how we've bridged that gap. We have looked at teacher training and teacher education, and we found that teacher training, generally speaking, is fairly expensive. Typically, a teacher would pay anywhere between $50 to $150 per course per teacher. And also, it's very difficult to scale. And third, it is very difficult to measure the efficacy of what the teacher has learned and how the teacher is then applying that to their own courses. So we've basically solved these problems. So first of all, what we've done is we've taken a volume-based approach ourselves. So when the teachers join the platform, yes, they still need to pay because I still need to, sustain the business. But we charge them, believe it or not, $20 US, not per month, but per year. That's $1 something per month. So that's equivalent to about 4 cups of Starbucks coffee, which even any public school teacher can afford. And that gives them access to not one course, but all the content on the platform, everything, with accreditations. So we have the CPD licenses in the Philippines. We have CPD licenses in the UK. So they get whatever course they complete, whatever training they complete, they actually get a credential for it on the blockchain for $20 a year. Because what we are interested in is to basically create impact at a mass volume level, not just for the top schools. So that's the first thing. And then once they are equipped with the skills, we then give them other opportunities on the platform so that they can even try and figure out additional revenue generation opportunities for themselves. So try and pull them themselves up and about from their current economic stature. Now, in terms of policy interventions, I think the governments can do whatever they want. I mean, there could be many policies, but I mean, again, do we really want the government to create a policy for every single thing? I mean, that's just a question that I'm kind of throwing back to Lina. I mean, do you really want policies to dictate how education is delivered? And do you want policies to be dictate on how companies run their business? So it's a chicken and an egg kind of a thing. There could be policies, but whether I think at the end of the day, policies will still fail if the people involved in this entire industry don't step up and take a stand and say, you know what, let's look at the mass volume rather than just the top tier. So that's my view on this. I think policy interventions don't really work all the time, depending on which country you are. Some countries, can use a cane. Some countries, if they use a cane, they will get a backlash. So it really depends on country to country. But that's my view.
Thanks, Neelesh. Perhaps I take some other questions, and then you can, Sufen and Cheryl, you can also answer that. It will be more participative. So there is a question from Darren. Thanks for asking. Who asked, what is the role of government and regional organization in counteracting the fragmentation of the education sectors by private providers? If someone wants to answer to these questions, please feel free.
I can go on this. I think in Malaysia, we have a very centralized education system, right? So everything comes from the federal government, and then it goes down. But what we find is that, it's not, it doesn't work as seamlessly as you would imagine it to be, because then it's almost like a one size fits all solution, and you would find that it's very difficult actually for private providers or other non-profit organizations to enter the space to assist the government or to provide contextualized support for the schools. So I think in countries like Malaysia, where the system is very centralized, sometimes this fragmentation is quite good, because we would need customized solutions to address the different needs of different states, the different communities, I think, that exist in Malaysia, and having just blanket policies and having just one big solution coming from the federal government to okay, so everyone needs to implement this solution, I think it causes a wider gap. And even in terms of budget, right? So equal distribution of budget instead of equitable distribution of budget is also very unfair. So schools in rural Malaysia, where they need more budget to really bridge the gap, they don't get it. So for me, I think in a centralized education system, I think governments should actually allow more organizations to come in to support them and to allow this contextualization of practices.
Thanks, Cheryl. Perhaps, Sufen, you want to add something briefly?
Yeah, so I think similar thoughts especially for Singapore. Because we also have this centralized, education system, and I fully agree. We really should open up to actually have more private operators to help to actually provide this different dimension in terms of education. Yeah, so that our children can actually learn in different aspects, not just the main education topics, the subjects. Yeah.
Thank you, Sufen. Before we hear from Yuri for her closing remarks, let me ask you a final personal questions in line with session 2. If I can hear from you, what will be, if you can give me 3 key skills to have in the future? It could be soft and hard skills or other skills, but if you can mention me 3 skills to have in the futures, what will be? Let's start with Sufen.
3. I guess one is definitely our coding skills, computational thinking,
Right.
and blockchain. Yeah, and maybe one more, I think, is more of collaboration skills.
Okay, good. Neelesh?
I think to me the most important skill is problem solving. That's really lacking at this point. So problem solving is one, and that could pretty much go hand in hand with like an entrepreneurial mindset kind of thing. I'm not saying entrepreneurship. Please don't get me wrong. I'm talking about entrepreneurial mindset. Okay, so that kind of goes hand in hand with problem solving. The second one I would probably say is creative thinking. again, problem solving, you need to have creative solutions. So creative thinking kind of goes along with that. And of course, computational thinking as well. That is important. I think, and I agree with Shufen on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Neelesh. Cheryl?
I had problem solving too as well. One of my
It's fine, you can use it.
It's great.
Yeah. So definitely problem solving, resilience. I think also, just students being able to adapt to whatever environments they are in, whatever types of situation they're in, and whatever learnings that's been given to them. I think resilience is also very important, and definitely collaboration as well. Learning how to work together and learning how to work with different people is very important.
Yes, and I will add one personally, which is critical thinking. Critical skills are very, very important, especially when we receive, some informations. Nowadays, you really need to have critical thinking. So now let's give the floor to close this great and engaging sessions to Mrs. Yuri Obara Belfali as a conclusion note. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been a really, really interesting discussion and inspiring insights. I cannot agree more with all the speakers, and I took note of the important ideas such as Shufen mentioned the importance of whole school approach and to support children, teachers, but also including families and parents. I also agree with Neelesh talking about the significance of teachers' capacity. So first, when we talk about technologies, we have to make it right to have the starting point for equitable access to the technologies, but it's not sufficient. We need to well support teachers so that they feel enabled to build on the available technologies to meet the needs of students. And Cheryl also highlighted the very important issue of existing remaining gap and inequalities, and also the importance for everybody to be mindful of the needs of students so that technologies could be used in response to the needs that we identify. So all these are really, really important. And if I may add my own reflection regarding technologies, I want to give two comments from the perspective of users, consumers, and from the perspective of developers. From the user perspectives, I think it's important to reflect students' needs in the use and development of technologies, as Cheryl said. And when, for example, OECD organized a forum of students to exchange their challenges and opportunities in the time of COVID, many students repeated that, yes, of course, delivery of teaching has been an issue, and they appreciate the efforts of schools and teachers to be creative to deliver teaching. But what is not sufficiently discussed and they feel missing piece is the feedback, communication, interaction. Students really feel that they are lost where they stand in their learning. They want to know whether they are on good track or not. And delivery of teaching cannot give that important picture for students. So we need to think further about the use of technologies, not only to teach them, but also to support them understand where they stand and how they can progress. Second, the industry and developers' perspectives. We really need to highlight that the development of the technologies, including AI and other technologies, are for the best interest of children. Unfortunately, in the world, the development is sometimes driven by industries' interest, or technological advancement overrides the pedagogical importance. And I'm not sure whether developers and computer scientists are working enough with pedagogy specialists, child development specialists. So you have already mentioned the risk of safety, health of children, ethical use of technologies. I think at the level of the development of technologies, we have to take all these dimensions into account so that from the beginning, it is designed for the benefit of children. But of course, taking into account the perspectives and maybe the interest of industries, governments, other stakeholders. So these are my thinking after all this interesting discussion. Thank you very much for the opportunity to engage in the discussion with you.
Thanks, Yuri, for this final note. Thanks also to all participants and guest speakers. See you in a few minutes for those who can for the final and next session, ASEAN Chairmanship, what role to play in the education sector. Thank you very much.